Hello, friends. We know that many of you listen to this podcast with your little ones around. We just wanted to give you a content warning for today's episode as we deal with some mature subject matter.
Sex is supposed to be this deep knowing of each other, it says in Genesis 4:1, right? Adam knew his wife Eve and they conceived a son. Like it's supposed to be a deep knowing, a deep intimacy. And how can you have intimacy when her needs and what she wants are completely irrelevant?
Do you find yourself wondering if this is all marriage has to offer? Are you so busy and exhausted at the end of the day that your marriage is the last thing you have energy to think about?
If you're wondering if God has more for your marriage, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Living Marriages Podcast. My name is Aaron, pastor and marriage coach.
And I'm April, spiritual director and marriage coach. Join us as we explore simple habits for building intimacy with your spouse while learning what it means to center your marriage on Christ. Well, we are so excited today to have a guest on our podcast that we've heard a lot about, and I think our listeners have heard about her before too. So we have Sheila Wray Gregoire with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's good to be here.
So if you haven't heard of Sheila, I'll tell you a little bit about her. So she is the author of 11 books, and I know you're working on one right now too that's coming up. And one of those books is The Great Sex Rescue. She is the host of the Bare Marriage podcast and the founder of To Love, Honor, and Vacuum. I support that. She's an award-winning writer and calls the church to more than just pat answers by conducting original research to find out what advice works and what advice really doesn't. Sheila and her husband Keith have been married for over 30 years. Together they have 2 adult daughters, 1 son in heaven, 2 sons-in-law, and 2 adorable grandchildren. Now, we have met Sheila through a good friend of ours, new friend of ours here in our neighborhood, Joanna, who you heard on the podcast just a little while ago. And so we are so excited to chat with you today, Sheila. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk to our listeners.
Yes, absolutely.
Sheila, you have been in the space of marriage and family for a while now. It looks like since 2003 you were speaking and writing about this. And what got you into this field of work?
Well, I started writing magazine articles and books, when I was in my early 30s. I had a research background, 2 postgrad degrees, but I was home with my kids because my husband was a physician. He had really crazy hours, and I just felt like I wanted to stay home. So I was always looking for something to do, and that's how I started writing. And then probably for about 15 years, I was kind of in the midst of just evangelical marriage advice, like in the conference circuit, writing books. And I was kind of plugged into it right in the middle of it. And then in the last few years, everything has changed for me as we started doing research and opened our eyes to what a lot of the problems were.
So can you tell us what changed? What happened a few years ago?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have always been paranoid about is that I'm going to plagiarize someone. So I really wanted to make sure that when I was writing, it was my own thoughts. And so I didn't actually read a lot of Christian marriage books. I read other books, but the only time I really read a Christian marriage book is if I was asked to endorse something and it was someone I knew. So I wasn't in the habit of reading a lot of other bestsellers. I just assumed, I love Jesus, they love Jesus, we're all saying the same thing. And then in January of 2019, I had a really bad migraine one afternoon, and I didn't want to work. I was procrastinating. I was in bed. I was looking at Twitter, as it was called then, and people were having a debate as to whether they needed love or respect. And they were referring to Emerson Eggerich's best-selling book, Love and Respect. And a lot of women were arguing they actually preferred respect. And I thought, well, so do I. And then I thought, I have that book and I've never read it because, I used to speak at family life marriage conferences in Canada, and they had given us like this whole box of best-selling marriage books, which I had never gone through. And so I thought, this is a great opportunity to pull that box out and find this book and procrastinate. So I got the book. And I turned to the sex chapter because at that point in my life, I was writing primarily about sex. My blog was mostly about sex. I had a best-selling book, The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, and 31 Days to Great Sex. I was really looking a lot at sex. So I turned to the sex chapter, And it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room. And I immediately started FaceTiming Joanna, who was working for me at that time, Joanna
Mhm.
Sawatsky, my daughter, Rebecca Lindenbach, and just freaking right out because Emerson Eggerichs said, if your husband is typical, he has a need that you don't have. And that
Mhm.
need was for physical release. If he didn't get physical release, he was going to come under satanic attack. And you shouldn't deprive him of something which takes so little time. Like he was the one who put like the 10 O's in that word. So little time. Um, and I was like, I just couldn't believe it. There wasn't a single word about intimacy. There wasn't a single word about
Mm.
her feeling pleasure too. It was just, this is something he needs or Satan's going to attack him and you need to provide it. And I thought, if that is what we're teaching, no wonder people are having problems.
Mm.
And up until then I had thought, as long as I produce enough helpful information, then I can help people. But what I realized is that producing healthy information isn't enough if
Okay.
our foundation is rotten. And
Mm.
in a lot of cases, the things that people have been taught, specifically in the evangelical church, are not of God. They're not of Jesus, and they're hurting people. And we need to deconstruct that so that we can build a healthier foundation. And that's what we started doing. In conversations with Joanna, who is our statistician, we decided to just do a really huge research project on
Mm.
how these teachings that are so prevalent in evangelical resources have affected women's marital and sexual satisfaction. And that the first survey that we did of 22,000 women became the Great Sex Rescue. And we've since done 3 other ones, I believe. Yeah.
That's
Wow.
amazing. I just like we've read through most of the Great Sex Rescue and just the detail and just and I know you guys when we talked to Joanna, she was talking about taking questions from already established research
Hmm.
projects and making sure everything was above
Yes.
board
Hmm.
and just how many responses you got is
Yeah.
phenomenal.
I know, and it was a long survey. It was like 35 minutes to take this thing. And so thank you to everyone who did. Like, we know that was a lot of their lives they gave us. So it was tremendously helpful. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sheila, can you, for those listeners who may not be familiar with the research, and you talked about a rotten foundation. What did the research find? What did it point to?
Well, we had several big findings. The first was just some basic stats. So we have a 47-point orgasm gap among evangelical couples,
Wow.
by which I mean that 95% of men almost always reach orgasm in a given sexual encounter compared to just 48% of women. So that's a big issue. That means there's a lot of
Mhm.
women who aren't enjoying sex very much.
Mhm.
We also have about a 23% rate of vaginismus, which is a sexual pain disorder. And evangelical women suffer from that at about twice the rate of the general population. And that's been a huge focus of our research, trying to break down why, like what is it specifically that causes sexual pain disorders among evangelical women. If you talk to most pelvic floor physiotherapists, they'll tell you that the majority of their clients are religious women. So, this is a huge issue, you
Hmm.
know. So those are some basic stats. But then we're looking at what are the teachings that are actually causing harm, that are reducing women's orgasm rates, reducing marital satisfaction, increasing sexual pain rates, decreasing the emotional intimacy that you feel. And we found a whole bunch of teachings that did that. And in Great Sex Rescue, we focused on 4 of them. And I think the biggest one, it's kind of like the one ring to rule them all. In Lord of the Rings, like the biggest one would be the idea that a wife is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it.
Mm.
So about 40% of evangelical women said that they got married believing that it's their obligation to have sex with him. And when she believes that when she's married, her chance of experiencing sexual pain disorders increases to almost the same statistical effect as if she'd been abused.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
So women's bodies interpret obligation as trauma,
Hmm. Hmm.
which makes a lot of sense
Hmm.
because both abuse and obligation say to a woman, you don't matter.
Yeah.
He has the right to use you however he wants. And
Yeah.
you're irrelevant in this. And that's not what sex is supposed to be. Sex is supposed
Hmm.
to be this deep knowing of each other. It says in Genesis 4:1, right?
Mhm.
Adam knew his wife Eve and they
Yeah.
conceived a son. Like it's supposed to be a deep knowing, a deep intimacy. And how can you have intimacy when her needs and what she wants are completely irrelevant?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
if what she wants is irrelevant, then it's not a knowing. It's an erasing of her as a person. And
Wow.
that's actually quite traumatic.
And it's simply a physical act, right? I know you
Yeah.
guys talk in the book
Hmm.
about how in evangelical culture, sex is intercourse.
Hmm.
When a person says sex, that's what they think of, right? But there is
Yes.
so much more to it, and not just for the woman, right? Like
Hmm.
for the man too, to be able to bring that pleasure to his wife and not just receive it himself. And so I think we're losing out on so much if we don't acknowledge that this was created by God. And we were at a family life conference recently, and I they started off the sex talk saying sex is a good gift from a good God.
Hmm.
And how many women see sex as a gift? Sadly, probably not very
Right.
many.
Well, yeah, if you identify sex as being intercourse, and then you hear that that's a good gift from a good God, just because you're having intercourse, A, does not mean she's not in pain. It
Mm,
does not mean that she consented.
Mhm.
It does not mean that she feels emotionally close to her husband.
mhm.
You know, it does not mean that she's even emotionally present. You know, she could be making a
Right.
shopping list in her head, right? Like
Right.
she could,
Yeah.
right? And so if you're a woman and that's the kind of sex you've been having, how does that compute to being a good gift? And this is why I
Mm,
really want Christians to stop saying that sex is intercourse.
mhm.
Um, because when we believe that, and then we read verses like 1 Corinthians 7, which say, do not deprive each other, and you think it means do not deprive each other of intercourse. How is the act of intercourse, if she's not reaching orgasm, if she's feeling used, if she's in pain, how is it depriving her by not having that
Right.
experience?
Right.
Mhm.
You know, she's already being deprived
Mm.
Mm,
because what sex is supposed to be is something which is intimate, mutual, and pleasurable for both.
mhm.
You know, it's supposed to bring you together, that deep knowing. It's supposed to be pleasurable for both. When you read songs, like she's saying as many words as he is. In fact, she's saying more and she's having a really good time.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and in 1 Corinthians 7 it's totally mutual.
Yeah.
So when intercourse is not mutual, intimate, and pleasurable for both, she's already being deprived and it doesn't even
Mhm.
count.
Mhm.
And that's I think the conversation that's been missing a lot of times.
Mm.
Now we were told by a few people or suggested by a few people that we have you on the podcast. And these were women that grew up in purity culture and have found even I was talking to a friend the other day that just started listening to the Great Sex Rescue, and she's like, I'm learning so much about myself and the things that I've learned that have affected the way that I'm approaching sex in my marriage. And so what is the feedback that you're getting? Why is this so valuable to men and women that are reflecting on this sexual relationship?
Yeah, I think purity culture messages, and it wasn't just purity culture. I think when we say purity culture, we tend to talk about that period of time, you know, roughly from the mid 90s to 2015, that 20-year period where there was such a heightened emphasis on teaching, especially to teens and young adults, you know, about purity in the sense that your worth is in your virginity, especially for
Mm.
girls,
Mm.
and teaching that boys are out of control monsters. And so it is
Mm-hmm.
girls' job to protect the boys and to be basically sin management tools for the boys around them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's not, saying we should wait, we should keep sex in marriage is not purity culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
purity culture was something in addition to that, which
Mm.
said that your worth is based on your virginity, which is just so horrendously toxic. But there's another aspect, which is what we were trying to look at in Great Sex Rescue, which is what are the messages that then accompany you into marriage?
Mm.
Because we had spent, at least the evangelical church has been through a little bit of a reckoning with purity culture, but we haven't been through the reckoning of, but what are we teaching people once they're married?
Right.
So that's what we were trying to look at in the Great Sex Rescue. And both purity culture and the messages that we give people about marriage hurt men as well.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we followed up our survey of 22,000 women with another survey of men, and we've got a lot of those details in the Good Guy's Guide to Great
Okay.
Sex, our book, Good Guy's Guide, and the Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex. Um, but these messages hurt men too. So it isn't
Mhm.
just women. It's just that women often bear the brunt of it because in evangelical culture, women are told it's men's needs and men's desires that matter, not your own.
Right.
But that does leave men feeling rather selfish. But one of the big things that we found in our survey, and this is something I want people to understand, is that these messages harmed women even if their husbands didn't agree with them, and even if it wasn't the husbands who were saying them, because it's usually the women who are reading these books.
Right.
Like when men go to men's Bible studies, they're not studying how marriage is supposed to go, right? And men don't even go to Bible studies in the same way that women do. But women are going to these studies, women are going to these small groups. We're the ones reading Power of a Praying Wife and Love and Respect and For Women Only and, His Needs, Her Needs. We're reading all of these books. And so we are internalizing these messages, and often our husbands don't even know what we're internalizing. They don't know what girls are taught in youth group. They don't know all this stuff, and it just kind of goes unspoken. And we talked to so many women in our focus groups who believed that obligation sex message. I remember one woman, this is a funny story, so that's good because a lot of our stories were sad, but I'll give you a funny one. So they got married, and she would initiate sex every 3 days because she read all the books that have the 72-hour rule in it, that men need sex every 72 hours or it becomes very difficult to control their eyes and they're not going to feel loved or cared for. And so she was initiating every 72 hours, and about 3 years into the marriage, she was just feeling really undesired because he never initiated sex. It was always up to her. And she was really tired of this. And she said to him, I just feel like you don't really desire me, because you never initiate. And he said, but I'm just trying to keep up with you. And she said, no, but you need it every 72 hours. And he goes, who told you that? Like, I don't know. And, and they actually talked about it for finally, and they settled into a new routine where someone initiates when they want sex. And now it's like either of them will initiate and they feel much freer, and it's much more fun for both of them. But this wasn't a situation where he was pressuring her. She was pressuring herself because of what she had read, and it was hurting both of them.
Wow.
And that reminds me too, just how we often think that the husband has the higher libido. That's just the way it is. Men have higher libidos than women. But that's not the case, is it?
No, we found, I think it was 56% of marriages, he had the higher libido. In 19% she does, and in 23% it's shared.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which
And in
changes
other
things.
studies outside of the church, we do find there's a higher percentage of marriages where women have the higher libido. And we did find there's a number of teachings which artificially lower women's libido. And so, if you take those teachings out, and I think we would also see more evangelical women having higher libidos, or at least shared. Yeah.
One question that's coming to mind is you talked about sex as being more than intercourse. Can you shed some more light into what God's vision of sex is?
We tend to downplay women's experience. That's the big thing. Because when we think sex is intercourse, intercourse is something which pretty much guarantees him an orgasm. It doesn't guarantee her one. And among the women who do regularly reach orgasm, a majority of them don't through intercourse alone. Most women need some other form of stimulation to get there. And part of the problem is when we talk so much in the church about how you need to save intercourse for marriage, which is what we mean by save sex for marriage, then it's like when you get married, intercourse is the main thing because this is what we've been waiting for. And all of the other stuff is just kind of like extras that doesn't matter. But for many women, it does. And I think if we were to stop thinking about intercourse and start thinking more about a holistic sexual encounter where you're each experiencing orgasm, you're each feeling known and loved and respected, and no one's feeling used, then that can encompass all kinds of different things. But you're really focusing on how you each can enjoy the experience. And that's what we should be doing rather than just assuming that God is happy when we have intercourse, which I think is the way that we often, a marriage where you're having lots of intercourse is one that pleases God. And I don't think God actually cares. And I think in many marriages, in 16% of marriages, women say that their primary feeling after sex is used. I feel used. God is not pleased with the marriages that have intercourse where she feels used.
Yeah.
And so it's not the intercourse that God is pleased with. It is a life-giving sexual relationship, which
Mhm.
helps both of you thrive.
Mhm.
So, what I'm hearing a lot of is that we are making a lot of assumptions based on bad teachings. And we
Mhm.
come into marriage and we're like, well, this is what he needs. And he's like, well, I don't know, we'll figure this out. And nobody's asking anybody any questions. They're just basically going off of what they think
Mhm.
their husband or their wife is like based on a book or
Yeah.
something they heard. And so I'm like, what does it look like to be curious as a couple? Because I think that's something that is often missing. How do we put the books to the side and say, hey, or say, like, this is what I read. Is that you? How do
Yeah.
we approach that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I think if people could sit down and just say, you know, is this true? Like I've heard this. Like for instance, one of the big things that we measured as well was the idea that all men struggle with lust. It's every man's battle.
Right.
Mm,
And that had really bad results for women and men. Women who grew up believing it had a lower libido, even if
Mhm.
they actually that was one of the ones where even if you didn't believe it, even if you were merely taught it, you ended up having a lower libido.
huh,
So
Wow.
just growing up in an environment where this was taught,
Mhm.
even if you didn't internalize it, just turned women off of sex. You
mm,
know?
mhm,
Because when you're taught that men can only see you like that,
mhm,
Mhm.
and that the men around you think like that,
Mhm.
that's just a really ugly thing to hear.
Mhm.
And we actually drilled down hard on this lust message in our survey of men because we wanted to figure out if it was really true. Because our theory is that we are mistaking noticing with lusting. So
Yeah.
if a guy finds a woman attractive, he assumes that he's lusted,
Right.
and that's simply not the case.
Mhm.
Jesus said, whoever looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery. So looking is a deliberate action,
Mhm.
and with lust is a deliberate mindset.
mm,
Mm.
So if you happen to see a woman passing by and you notice that she has a good figure, you haven't lusted after her.
Right.
mhm,
If you stop and stare at her and obsess over her and picture things, then yes, you have, right?
Mm.
If you are consuming her for your sexual gratification in some way, then yes, you have. But if you merely like, whoa, she's really pretty or whatever, that
Mhm.
you haven't lusted.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of men have grown up with this. So that was our theory. So we wanted to measure it. So we asked guys, hey, do you have a daily struggle with lust? And about 75% of men said they did.
Mm.
Okay, so that's a lot, but it's still not every man, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
100%,
mhm,
Yeah.
75%. So then we gave 6 different scenarios where guys could lust, and we took these scenarios right out of Christian marriage books. So,
Okay.
um, like seeing a woman bend over, putting her toddler into a minivan in the grocery store parking lot,
Mm.
waitresses at restaurants. Like we took all these things right out of Christian books, and we gave different options of what you would be most likely to do in this scenario, and some of them would be lusting, and some of them would not. And of the 75%, almost half of them didn't lust in every scenario we gave them, and they didn't have a problem with pornography.
mm,
Mm.
So, we're looking at these guys and we're like, oh, we don't see the lust. Like, where's the lust? Right?
Yeah.
mhm,
um, and so again, I think a lot of guys are assuming they're struggling with lust when they're really not.
Mhm.
And so the number of guys that are struggling with lust is probably closer to 40% or
Okay.
50%. It's not 100%,
mhm,
Wow.
you know?
As parent of two young boys, that's encouraging, I think, to hear, to be able to encourage them in that as well.
Mhm.
Um, Sheila, I'm thinking now as a parent, raising our boys in a culture where again, anything goes with sex, it feels like.
Mhm.
But on the other side now, we're discovering, oh, wow, okay, evangelicalism has a lot to reckon with as well. What counsel, what wisdom would you give parents to raise their kids with a good view of sex?
One thing the younger generation really has going for it
Mhm.
is that they really understand respect and dignity of people. Like
Okay.
they
mm,
really they really understand justice issues. They really
Mm.
do.
Mhm.
And I remember a story that went viral on Facebook maybe 10 years ago now, where a woman was saying that they were in at church and another woman came in and sat in the pews in front of her and her teenage sons. And this woman had teenage daughters that were wearing leggings
Mm.
and were very form-fitting. And this woman was so upset because how were her sons going to be able to worship with these two girls sitting in front of them? And so she got her boys up and she went and sat in front of these girls so the boys didn't have to look at these girls all through the service. And what is that mother now taught those sons?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that you can't worship God if there are females in your presence who are dressed in a certain way. So a female in your presence has the ability to stop you from worshiping God. And you need to view these females as threats to you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the amazing thing about kids is if you just don't make it a big deal, it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like when your boys go to school, they're seeing girls in leggings
Yep.
every single day. When they go to the mall, when they go on a bus, there are women dressed like that. It's everywhere. And if you don't make a big deal out of it, it just is what it is, right? But in the church, we make such a huge deal out of it. Like you need to dress in a certain way so you're not a stumbling block to the boys around you. And in churches that teach that, the girls are more likely to be sexually assaulted. The boys are more likely to be addicted to pornography. Um, like it just leads to all kinds of problems. Whereas if you're just like, hey, let's just treat each other like people, which is possible to do, by the way, you get over a lot of these problems.
And we've had
You know?
such low expectations for Christian men, right? We've
Yeah.
said, well, this is your battle, so sorry, that's just the way it is, and figure it out as best as you can. But what if we were saying you can rise to like a higher level? You can be a man of God that respects everyone around you, that loves people, whoever they are, what gender they are, with God's love, right? Like if we can, I'm thinking with our boys, like teaching them to take hold of that and that they can decide who they are.
Yeah, I've talked to some young men, and they would often say that there'd be girls coming to the youth group who were dressed really inappropriately, like just really, really inappropriately.
Yeah.
And their first thought was, what's going on in the girl's life? I need to make sure that she's protected. Like, and so I'm just going to befriend her and I'm going to tell her that, I like her for more than just her body. Right. And I'm going to make her feel that she's welcome here and she's accepted here. And that's what we want from our boys, right? Like that's totally possible to do. And I've talked to so many young men in the early 20s, like Gen Z men who they understand what's going on. And they know that when a girl dresses really inappropriately for her age, there's probably something going on in her life and she probably needs some help. And so I'm just going to befriend her and I'm going to be there for her so that maybe if she ever needs to talk, she'll talk to me, but so that other people don't harass her, and instead of seeing her as, oh my gosh, she's a threat to me. See her as, oh, well, here's someone that I can actually help. And I wish adults would see that. Like if a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl comes to your church dressed in fishnet stockings, that's usually a red flag. There's something going on in her family, right? I'm not talking about girls dressing, like a lot of older adults will look at how normal 13, 14-year-olds dress and think that they're dressing like skanks, right? Or like they're dressing like streetwalkers or something. If someone is dressing like 95% of 13, 14-year-olds dress now, even if you don't like it, they're not dressing like skanks. They are being culturally appropriate. But we all know that one or two girls who are going above, like who are going beyond. And instead of labeling a 13 or 14-year-old as like a Jezebel or a temptress or something, I wish we could say, oh, that's probably cause for concern. Let me make sure that there's some good adults around here who are just showing love to her.
Right.
Wow. Well, and as you're saying that, I'm realizing we approach judgment happens when we feel attacked or we think, oh no, what's going to happen, right? We don't see the person, we see the threat. And that's, as you're saying that's what I'm hearing. If we look at a girl that's dressed inappropriately and we're thinking about our son and how he's going to react, we're seeing her as a threat rather than as a person. And so, as you said before, that's just, we need to switch that in our minds because those pathways are built that way. and we're not caring for people in the way that we need to.
Yeah, I remember Every Man's Battle, like on their website, they actually talk about identifying the enemies around you so that
Mm.
you reduce the chance of lust. And they have a list of the enemies that you need to identify. And among those enemies are female coworkers and female joggers.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, would Jesus ever call a female coworker an enemy? I seem to remember Paul calling his female coworkers co-laborers in the gospel,
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
you know, but when when Christians are encouraging men to see women as enemies, that's not of Christ.
Hmm. So Sheila, it really, through this conversation, I'm also hearing just how important it is we get back to being able to see one another as image bearers of
Hmm.
God. What hope now? Most of the couples or most of the people listening to this podcast would be in the Christian church, evangelical churches. What hope is there for our marriages in the evangelical church?
I think we are going through such a huge upheaval
Mm.
right now, like in the last 5 years, about everything in the world, right? The whole
Yeah.
world is just shaking. I
Yeah.
feel like God is just shaking us
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah,
Mhm.
You know,
absolutely.
everything that can be shaken will be shaken. Um, and that can be a scary place to live.
Mm.
But I think what's going on is that this generation is very much like the Christians in 1525. Like if you go back in time, 500 years ago, Martin Luther nailed those theses to the Wittenberg door
Yeah.
years ago, and he's been publishing tracts every single day, writing 5,000 word essays that are printed on printing presses and distributed throughout Europe every single day. And people are writing tracts against him, and those are
Mm.
getting distributed on printing presses every single day too. And there's all these fights going on. And if you were someone who really wanted to follow God and agreed with a lot of Luther's critiques of the church at the time, what do you do?
Right.
Mhm.
Nothing new was formed yet.
Mm.
You're kind of in this middle time when you don't know where it's going to end. You know that we can't go backwards,
Mhm.
but it's all turmoil. And I think that's very much where we are. And it's an uncomfortable place to be, but it's an exciting place to be.
Mm.
And I think it's important as we move forward that we recognize that some of the things that felt safe weren't good.
Right.
And Christians felt really safe having our own marriage books and never reading any secular ones. And we
Yeah.
felt very safe only ever, listening to pastors for advice.
Mhm.
And the truth is that we didn't do ourselves a lot of good in doing that
Mm.
because many of the people who wrote these books had absolutely zero qualifications.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they weren't writing based on peer-reviewed research. They were just
Mm.
saying what they thought. And it was given a weight that it should never have been given.
Mm.
Um, and in fact, I can't think of any books that were bestsellers and we analyzed them. We analyzed the 15 best-selling sex and marriage books,
Mm.
and none of them were based on peer-reviewed research
Right.
or were written by people with qualifications.
Mm.
And so I think as we try to build something new, and I think that there is a desire to build something new and healthy, let's understand that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.
Amen.
So he is truth. When we discover things that hold up in real life, we are doing the work of Jesus, even if it's not in a church.
Mhm.
And when there is research that says, hey, sex works best when both people matter, you
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
um, and you say, oh, but you don't have a Bible verse there. It's like, okay, I could pull up a Bible verse for that, but like this instinct we have to say, no, if it's not a pastor saying it, I'm not going to listen to it.
Mm.
We need to get over that, and we need to
Mm.
start realizing, hey, if it's true, if there's scientific basis for this, it is of God.
Yeah.
Like that is
Mhm.
part of the whole point of Jesus being the truth means that all of truth in the world is wrapped up in Jesus. And
Yeah.
so when we discover truth that leads to intimacy and growth and flourishing, that's good. It takes us closer to Jesus. And so let's just not put up with counterfeits anymore. And
Yeah.
I think that's what the new the new generation coming up is seeing is that they're not willing to just do the same old thing anymore. They want flourishing. They want a faith that is going to be real and authentic, not just something where there's a lot of threats and fear. And I really think millennials and Gen Z are going to change the world. Change the church for sure. I really think that they're going to lead us in a way that we haven't seen before, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Wow.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
One last question for you, Sheila, and maybe this is one, if you'd be open to it, we'd love to have you back with your husband, Keith, sometime. You co-wrote this book, The Marriage You Want, which we're really enjoying. And we're reading the conclusion before coming on air with you. And you asked this one question, which really, I think, resonated with us, and your response to it was so insightful. And so I'm going to just ask it to you now. Is marriage hard?
Yeah, and I would say that there are seasons where marriage was hard, but no, our marriage isn't hard. Our marriage is actually quite easy. And I think that this teaching that marriage is hard, which we hear so much in the church, and it's interesting because you don't hear it a lot outside of the church.
Okay.
Like when you read secular bestsellers, they don't talk about how marriage is hard. They don't.
Wow.
But evangelicals set that as an expectation. And I think by doing that, they're teaching people not to question things. Like when their teaching doesn't work, when their teaching on sex leads to bad outcomes, we're primed not to question that. And I don't think that's very good. The way that I would put it is this: life is hard.
Yes.
Life is very hard. People can get sick. People can die. You can lose your job. You can get injured. You can suffer from different diseases. Like life is just hard. And marriage brings complexity to that. It brings a whole other set of family that could get sick and lose their job. It brings children who are exhausting. And even the process of trying to have children can be heartbreaking if you suffer from infertility.
Definitely.
Right? So marriage brings a lot of complications. But your marriage should not be the source of the hard thing in your life. Your marriage should be something which makes bearing the hard things easier. And if it's not, then that's a sign that there's something to work on. It's not a sign that, oh, you just need to go to God and for everything in your life instead of your spouse. No, that's a wake-up sign that, oh, there's something not working here. And we should do something about this. We should address this because this isn't the way it's supposed to be.
To be curious and to ask questions and admit our own faults, and which is not an easy thing to do, right? Working on the hard stuff takes effort.
Yeah. But then when you do, it's like things just kind of become, it's just your normal. And it doesn't need to be hard.
Well, here's to a new normal. Sheila Wray Gregoire, thank you so much for being our guest on the Living Marriages podcast today. Again, we would love to extend an invitation to you and Keith to come back sometime. That would be great. Just for our listeners who may not be aware of your writings, your books, your podcasts, where can they follow you in online?
Yeah, so you can find me at baremarriage.com. That's BARE, baremarriage.com. And we have the Bare Marriage podcast every Thursday. And then our books, Great Sex Rescue is our big one. We have The Marriage You Want, Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. She Deserves Better. Lots of great things out there. But if you go to baremarriage.com, it's all there.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so very much again for your time, your wisdom, and the hope you're bringing. So
thank you.
Thank you for the privilege of journeying with you today as we seek God's best for our marriages.
Before you go, if you've been blessed, challenged, or inspired by what you've heard today, please bless us by hitting the follow button, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and sharing this podcast with family and friends.
You can also support this nonprofit podcast by making a charitable donation at our website, livingmarriages.com.
Until next time, praying the life, intimacy, and connection of God's love over you and your marriage.